Ever catch yourself saying, oops, way more than you'd like to admit? Like, oops, sorry, didn't see you there. Or my bad, wrong email. It's these little slip-ups, right? Well, get this. The ancient Israelites, they had a whole system for dealing with those oops moments. And let me tell you, it was way more involved than just a quick sorry.
It definitely went beyond a simple apology.
We're diving deep into the book of Leviticus, chapters 4 through 6, to explore their, well, surprisingly intricate laws on sin offerings.
Right. These weren't just like quick apologies whispered to a higher power. This was serious business back then.
Oh, absolutely. They had rules and rituals for every kind of mishap you can imagine.
What I find fascinating is how these chapters give us this incredibly detailed look at how the Israelites viewed sin, justice, the whole shebang. It wasn't just about, appeasing an angry God. It was about restoring balance within themselves, with each other, and with the divine. A holistic approach, you could say.
Right, like hit the cosmic reset button. But, okay, where do we even start? We're talking Leviticus chapters 4 through 6. That's a whole lot of rules.
It is a lot. But the first thing to wrap our heads around is this. They differentiated between intentional and unintentional sins. And this distinction, this is critical to understanding the whole system.
Okay, so they understood that everyone makes mistakes. But were they really that prone to sinning accidentally?
Well, put yourself in their sandals for a second. This was a time when religious law was woven into practically every aspect of life. It was like down to the most mundane details, There were rules about what you could eat, wear, touch, even what you could offer as a sacrifice. Everything was connected to the divine in some way.
Talk about pressure.
Yeah.
So like stumbling and accidentally touching something considered ritually unclean, that was a big no-no.
Well, it was a huge deal. And it wasn't just about like physical cleanliness for the Israelites' purity. It was also about maintaining a right relationship with God. Anything that disrupted that harmony, even by accident, it required some form of atonement, some way to get back in sync.
Got it. So let's say I'm living back then and I accidentally brush up against something deemed unclean. What happens next? Do I just say a quick prayer and hope for the best?
Not quite. Remember, this is ancient Israel we're talking about. Rituals were everything. We're talking about specific offerings, often involving animals, to symbolize the act of making amends, of righting the wrong.
Okay, things are getting interesting. So hold on. We've all been there, right? That awkward moment you accidentally bump into someone. Did they really have different offerings for every possible scenario?
You bet they did. And here's where it gets even more intriguing. The type of offering, it wasn't just about the sin itself. It also depended on who committed it.
Wait, are you telling me they had different levels of sorry back then?
In a way, yeah. Leviticus, it lays out different offerings depending on whether the sinner was the high priest, a leader, or an everyday person.
So a high priest messing up, that was a bigger deal than, say, a farmer accidentally touching something deemed unclean.
Exactly. It's not that the farmer's transgression was insignificant. It's just that a leader's actions, they held more weight because they impacted the whole community. Think about it. A leader misinterprets a law. Well, the consequences could be widespread.
That makes a lot of sense. So it wasn't just about personal accountability. It was about the ripple effects of your actions, especially for those in positions of, power.
Precisely. And it speaks to a key concept in their whole worldview, this idea that sin, even if it's unintentional, even a little slip up, it had the power to disrupt the social fabric, to throw things out of whack.
So if even an accidental slip up could throw things out of whack, what did these offerings actually look like? We're talking animals, right? Was it always a goat or something more dramatic?
Animals were definitely involved. It wasn't always a goat, though. They were, a popular choice. But Leviticus, it gets incredibly specific, outlining different animals for different situations. We're talking bulls, lambs, even birds.
So there was a whole hierarchy of animals. Did they have a sacred petting zoo on site?
Something like that. And get this, in some cases, if someone couldn't afford an animal, they could offer flour. Imagine that, apologizing with a bag of flour.
They just sprinkle it around. That's amazing.
Oh.
So they built in some flexibility.
Yeah.
For different socioeconomic situations.
Absolutely. The point was to make atonement accessible to everyone, right? They weren't trying to make it impossible to make things right. They wanted everyone, regardless of means, to be able to restore that balance.
Okay, that's pretty cool. So let's walk through an example. Let's say I'm a shepherd. I'm out with my flock, and I accidentally grazed my sheep on land that was supposed to be left fallow for a season. I totally spaced, violated a religious law. Oops. What happens next?
Okay, so first, you'd probably feel that pang of guilt, right? Knowing you'd messed up, disrupted that intended order. Then you'd gather your offering.
Time to say sorry with a sheepish gift.
Exactly. In this case, since it's a sin offering and you're a regular person, not the high priest, you'd probably bring a lamb or a kid. Without any defects, of course.
Got to make sure it's top shelf. Even back then, huh?
Exactly. This offering, it's a symbol of your remorse, your willingness to make things right. So you'd bring it to the tabernacle, the central place of worship. Imagine a courtyard bustling with people, priests in their ornate robes, the scent of incense in the air. It would have been quite an experience.
Whoa, I can practically hear the murmur of the crowd, the anticipation. What happens next? Do they have like a gong?
No gong, but definitely a procedure. The priest, acting as a mediator between the people and God, would guide you through this whole ritual.
So you're not just like wandering around with the lamb under your arm.
No, definitely not. You'd lay your hands on the animal's head, transferring, symbolically, the weight of your transgression onto the creature.
Wow, that's heavy, literally transferring your guilt.
That was the idea. Then the animal would be slaughtered. Now, I know this might seem shocking to us today, but in that time and place, it was a powerful act, representing the cost of atonement, the gravity of disrupting that sacred order.
So the taking of a life, it underscored how important it was to make things right.
Exactly. Then things get even more, hands-on. The priest would take some of the blood and sprinkle it on the horns of the altar, which sat right there in the heart of the tabernacle. This symbolized offering the essence of the sacrifice directly to God.
Okay, so every detail, every movement, it all had meaning. It wasn't just going through the motion.
Not at all. The rest of the blood was poured out at the base of the altar, signifying the cleansing of the sanctuary, the restoration of purity and balance.
It's interesting, this idea of blood representing both the weight of the transgression and the potential for cleansing. Powerful symbolism. But was it all about, like, appeasing God? Or was there something more happening, like a personal transformation for the person making the offering?
That's a really important question. And you're right, there's definitely an element of appeasement there, acknowledging the need to restore that right relationship with the divine. But the act of offering a prized possession, going through this intricate ritual, it wasn't just about checking boxes. It was about acknowledging your misstep, expressing remorse, and signaling, hey, I messed up, but I'm committed to doing better.
So it's about an internal shift as much as an external act.
Exactly. Think about it this way. If you mess up today and have to apologize to someone, a heartfelt apology, it involves more than just saying the words, right? You have to mean it, be willing to make amends, and hopefully not repeat the mistake. It's the same idea here.
That's such a good point. Our modern ideas of accountability, making amends, they really do resonate with these ancient practices. It's fascinating.
They really do. And just when you think you've got a handle on these sin offerings, Leviticus throws in a curveball with something called guilt offerings. And these take things to a whole other level of making things right.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued. We've covered a lot of ground with these sin offerings. What makes guilt offerings different? What kind of oops moments required this specific approach? So we've got these sin offerings all about restoring that balance when you've messed up accidentally in God's eyes. But now we've got guilt offerings coming in. What's the difference?
Guilt offerings, they get at something really nuanced in how the Israelites approached making things right. Sin offerings, those were about breaches in ritual purity, offenses against God. But guilt offerings, those were all about transgressions against other people. Like you messed up, but you specifically messed up with someone.
So it's like recognizing that sometimes our oops moments, they don't just affect us and, the divine. They have real world consequences for the people around us.
Exactly. It's acknowledging that our actions, even the unintentional ones, they have ripple effects on the community. Guilt offerings were required for things like, accidentally damaging someone's property, or keeping something you found that wasn't yours, or even giving a misleading oath that ended up harming someone. It's about responsibility.
It's fascinating how they made that distinction. Sin offerings, you and the divine. Guilt offerings, you and your neighbor. What did those guilt offerings actually look like? Anything like the sin offerings?
There are definitely some similarities. You'd still bring an animal sacrifice, typically a ram without defect, to the tabernacle. The rituals still involve the priest, the laying on of hands, the sprinkling of blood, all those symbolic actions to really drive home the gravity of the situation.
Okay, so the gravity is still there, but there's got to be something different, right? What sets a guilt offering apart?
The key difference is this. With the guilt offering, you didn't just make things right with God. You had to make things right with the person you wronged first. Leviticus is very clear about that.
Whoa, No shortcuts. You couldn't just offer up the ram and call it a day. You actually had to face the music and make amends directly with the person you harmed.
Exactly. And we're not just talking about a quick apology either. Restitution was a fundamental part of the guilt offering. If you stole something, you had to return it, plus add an additional fifth of its value on top. If you damaged someone's property, you had to compensate them for the loss. You had to make them whole again.
That's really amazing. They didn't just say you're sorry. They actually built a system of restorative justice right into their religious practice. It makes you think about our justice system today.
Doesn't it? It really highlights something insightful about their worldview. They saw this direct link between personal accountability and communal harmony. To truly repair a wrong, you had to address both the spiritual and the social dimensions of the transgression.
That's such a powerful concept. It really adds a whole other layer of meaning to these seemingly obscure laws from Leviticus.
It does, doesn't it? It makes you realize these ancient rules are more relevant than we might think.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the world of sin offerings and guilt offerings, what's the one thing you really hope our listeners will take away from this?
I think the biggest takeaway is that these ancient rituals, they weren't just about blindly following rules. It was about recognizing the impact of our actions, seeking forgiveness, and taking concrete steps to make things right, not just for ourselves, but for those around us.
It's like you said earlier, it's about restoring balance, that harmony in ourselves and our community.
Exactly. And who knows, maybe the next time you find yourself saying, oops, it might spark a deeper reflection on how to truly make amends.
Food for thought. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and you might be surprised what wisdom you unearth.
Welcome to Charlie and Mia's podcast. We're embarking on an exciting journey to read through the entire Bible in just 1 year. Every day, we dive into Scripture, exploring its meanings and how it applies to our lives today. We invite you to join us on this incredible adventure of learning and discovery. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you never miss an episode.